Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. So, we are week 6, module 6. Hands down, this is probably, I know I say this every time, this is probably one of my favorite discussions. So, if you're in module 6 and you're scrolling through, you're going to see a lot of readings. You're also going to see videos and you're going to see photos. So it's a little easier when I teach because I can guide you through on how to click through all of these. I have them in order and how they reflect to the actual reading, and you'll see. So you can tell by the quizzes that the two main readings I'm looking at are Taking the Land and Why Mow. So because of that, obviously, make sure of all the things you read those two things. They are very important. The other stuff is supplemental and kind of stands behind it and gives you a little bit more visual as to everything. As we start moving forward, so we're almost done with the narrative. That is due next week, but I'm already giving you a little bit of pieces of the elephant. I'm getting you into the research, but I'm making it a little easier on you because I've done the research. You just have to read the information that I found. Okay, so you're starting to see, you're like, oh, there's a little bit more. Super easy. Everything all ties together. So you go, oh, this is cool. I see now. So the whole point of it is to put everything together so that you get a better idea exactly kind of what I'm talking about. So again, in week 6, you're going to see Taking the Land, and then Time to Mourn is in reference to a situation in which land was taken. The decades of how racist housing policy left neighborhoods sweltering is a bit like a part of taking land. Does that make sense? So it's redlining. Anyway, read that article. It kind of ties everything together and in ways in which we manipulate the system in order to take land from people. Okay, so that's kind of what that's in reference to. Why mow? Why mow is the ultimate American dream. I got my land, okay, kind of discussion we're going to have. And then we've got a couple little things. Those other 3 readings, the Ice Cream Man is Racist, 12 nursery rhymes you didn't know were racist, and how to respond to common racist statements. So they are in relation, but they might not seem like they make sense at first. But if you follow me with this lecture through the PowerPoint, you'll see how they go in, and you go, oh, I see now. So at first you might just be like, that, how does that have any relation to this? Okay. For the 12 childhood nursery rhymes, some of you might be like, wow, that's pretty messed up. That's exactly why it's messed up. Okay, so you'll kind of see them. I don't think any of the stuff is triggering, but just as a note, it is something that you might go, that's jacked up. All right. So the pictures, Taking the Land from Ari Kara, I think is his name. Forgive me on that. I didn't practice saying his name before recording. Good job, Kylene. Anyway, so the Taking the Land, the picture right there, is in relation to the article that's right below Taking the Land. So American Progress, we'll talk about that in a little bit. It has a lot to do with Manifest Destiny. A lot of you in history classes are like, oh, I know this one already. We'll talk a little bit more in depth about that. And then Moss Lawns is just a picture. And then slavery was never fully abolished in the United States. Again, has to do with the other stuff, but I put them in these kind of orders for a reason. They all go together. Myths about appropriation. I think I'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward, usually towards Halloween. But I like the video, and I think it is very much in relation to a couple of our vocabulary words, so I throw it in there. You notice there are 3 videos of the Tulsa race riots, and there's a reason for that. Because when you are doing research, you don't just pull from one thing and go, that's it, that's whole. You get multiple things and kind of put them together and see where you're seeing the similarities and maybe things that are outlying that you're like, kind of sounds like that's not as factual as the rest of this based on the information that I have. So in one of these videos, there's a lady and she's talking about the Tulsa race riots and how it starts, but her story is quite a bit different than the other 2, which have the research and stuff behind it. It's still very close, but I want you to be mindful of those things when you watch these videos, which is why I keep them there. So, and then we have a comedian from London who comes and travels to Alabama, and then a little video on systematic racism. And again, a lot of this is in relation to land, which is pretty wild to think how land has anything to do with racism. Let's find out, okay? So I'm going to go through the PowerPoint. You could hang out, listen to my voice while the PowerPoint's rolling, whatever you got to do. Just make sure you're doing the lectures, you cool, all right? Because I spend a lot of time in a very hot room recording these, so... Plus, I really enjoy it, and I love this topic. I love this entire, the WIMO and the land is just, these are my two favorites. So anyway, again, we're going to start with the PowerPoint, taking the land in WIMO. This is week 6, and we're going to go right into these slides. So, vocabulary. First and foremost, manifest destiny. That is literally the epitome of what America was based on. In fact, the definition alone tells us so. So the 19th century doctrine or belief that the expansion of the U.S. throughout the American continents was both justified and inevitable. Y'all, it was going to happen. We justify our actions because it is the manifest destiny. We were meant to do this. Yeah. So if you go back to American Progress, you're going to take a look at that picture and go, what are they saying here? We'll go back to that in just a little bit. So, that being said, we're going to go back to the times when we started taking all the land, and how did we do that in a non-violent way? What were the times in which we were not violent, that we were taking land, which was pretty manipulative? So, the Dawes Act of 1887 authorized the federal government to break up tribal lands, okay, by partitioning them into individual plots. And then only those Native Americans who accepted the individual allotments were allowed to become U.S. citizens. Yes, and so we're going to talk about citizenship in just a second. So that being said, I'm going to go to some other notes because I have like literally tons of notes here, guys. Okay. So the Dawes Act gave 160 acres, and this is in your reading, 160 acres to the head of each family, okay, smaller to women and orphans, and the rest were sold to whites, with the extra money going to education. This is where they get you. And as a teacher, I try very hard to be as transparent and truthful about what it is I'm trying to give you for information. My intention here is to give you as much as you can so that you can tell me, what did you come up with from said information? Okay, so, and I say this because they manipulated and used education in order to take land. Okay, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. So the holders of the allotments would be granted U.S. citizenship. Okay, and so the selling of the lands would help facilitate the education. Okay, here's the thing. Okay, let me talk about that in a second. I have to go through the vocabulary word because then we're going to go into the hunter and farmer part of the taking the land. So I'm going to try not to get ahead of myself. I get very excited about this, if you couldn't tell. Okay, so now we have the Dawes Act, which is giving justification for taking lands, okay? All right, so indigenous people, we are going to make that mention, so we're not saying anything that is necessarily considered inappropriate when we are referring to people who were on, that we know of on this land first. So indigenous people, they're known in different regions with different type of, whether they were First Nations, Aboriginal, or Native people. They are the First Peoples, they're the ethnic groups who are original or earliest known inhabitants of an area. Okay, so Native Americans, as we would call them, are also indigenous peoples who are the very first people that we know to be inhabitants of these particular areas. We're going to talk about Ishi, the last Yahi, next week. All right, okay. So, in contrast to groups that have settled, I'm a settler, occupied or colonized the area most recently. Okay, so these are things to consider when we're having these dialogues about who are we talking about. We're talking about the land we took from indigenous peoples. Okay. All right, so inalienable rights. And this one will get you too, okay? Our Constitution says we have inalienable rights, and those inalienable rights are natural rights, right? in this definition, it says those rights that could not be surrendered to by the citizens, by the citizens of the sovereign, which is like the monarchy or whatever. All right, such rights were thought to be natural rights, independent of positive law. So, for the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay, those fundamental rights are endowed to every human being by his or her creator. Okay, now we're starting to throw in some other dialogue in here. Okay, and it's usually mentioned as natural rights. But again, that statement, citizens to the sovereign. Okay, so if you were a citizen to the sovereign, you had inalienable rights. But what if you were not a citizen of the sovereign, right? Do you have the same rights? And this is where these muddled lines start coming in about who and all gets justice, right? Okay, so we're going to go past that real quick, and we're going to go to the next one, which is institutional racism. Okay, so we're kind of going down the line here. First, we've got this manifest destiny where the land is owed to us. It was going to happen. We're just going to take it. Sorry. And then we're kind of like, well, we'll fill out some contracts for you, and then you can just like follow through. And then, we'll educate you so that the land, you won't need so much land. Okay, we'll talk about that again. Farmers and hunters. And then we go through, what was the last one? Sorry. Okay. And then we go through and we say, all right, all people have inalienable rights if you are a citizen within that. Okay, so now institutional racism is a form of racism that's embedded, is natural practice within society or an organization. Do you see what it's saying there? So what's happening is, if you in your head are told that it is your destiny to take over these lands, you now have ingrained racist ideas about people who were here first, indigenous peoples, and your ideas about who they are, right? And how, again, in the readings, when they talk about, the wild, unkept type of peoples that were here, and we're just trying to help. We're just trying to help here and civilize you, okay? So, these types of institutional racism, so, okay, you have to go back and watch some of these videos, especially understanding exactly, let me go back to the video and show you which one that one is, because it's really a good one. All right, so the systematic racism is a really important video, and the reason why it is because it explains how this all started, because in like previous to the 1400s, race wasn't a thing, but it started to become a thing when there were wars, and the wars were religious, and when you couldn't figure out who was on what side, what was the most obvious thing that was going to be different? Well, skin color. All right, so then they claimed race, and then there were the race wars and all this stuff. So that was the Spanish Inquisition. Any who watch the video, they tell a better job of it. All right, so now we have this institutionalized racism about seeing people of different colors and ethnicities, and we have it ingrained in our brain based on social constructs about what we think, right? Okay. All right, so obviously the issue for this is it can lead to issues of discrimination, whether it's healthcare, employment, housing, social power, education. Education is a huge one. Educational is incredibly systemically racist. Absolutely it is, okay? And I try everything I can to abolish these things within my classroom. So this is why I do things a little bit different. And some of you may be like, that's not the way it was taught, that we're going to do things different around here, okay? Okay, so that being the case, now you are going to start to see how, again, we are ingrained in our brains these things that make us understand what we think. We might not even know that we have privilege because of these systemic racist types of behaviors, okay? Things that are in the system that make us not realize these lack of, we don't see our privilege because of this. That's the problem, okay? All right, so Now, go through and you're going to see those videos like, again, these nursery rhymes that we have grown up with, and we sing song. This is what you do. You educate the children first, and then you get them to kind of follow your lead. And I mean, as a child, I would never have thought any of these things. I just figured this out over the summer. I'm like, what? I didn't know these were so terrible. Go through and take a look at these. Like the Ice Cream Man song that plays, that we hear all the time, like, ooh, the Ice Cream Man. Do you see what they do there? So subconsciously you have this song that's like, ooh, it reminds me of the Ice Cream Man. But the song itself is racist, okay? Even though you don't hear any of the words, there was that behind it. Y'all, wait till you take English 11 and see how manipulated you are. I wish I could do this and that class with you guys, because you'd just be so angry at the world. How could you do that to me? Okay, this is just how it is. And so that's when I ask the question, how free are we? I don't know if we're always being manipulated in some way, shape, or form. I don't know. Okay, this is just a human. This is what humans do. All right, one more power move, I guess you would call it. So after that, also take a look about slavery. Slavery was never fully abolished in the United States, and how we use prisons as labor. Okay, and then again, that systematic racism video is really good. It's actually it's short. These are all pretty short and quick. And then for those of you who I feel everyone should take a minute and read how to respond to common racist statements. And the funny thing about this is some of us might take a look at those and be like, that's a racist statement? Yeah, it is. So unless you're anti-racism, it is considered still racism. So take a look at that. All right. It's just another thing for you to be able to say, oh, I didn't know, these are new things to me. And I'll be honest with you, over the summer, I was like, holy hell, like here I really thought I was doing a thing, and I realized I wasn't doing what I thought I was doing. So I'm just trying to give you all the things to try and come up with a little bit more education on all the sides, every side we can come up with. And that's what research is, and that's what I'm trying to get you to do by the end of this class, is just look at all of the things. Instead of just going, I only see this is all I will ever see. Break away from that. It's important for growth as a human being, even if it might be something you're like, that's not what I've believed. I'm telling you, I grew up in a very small town. Well, I grew up in Paradise. It's a very small town. And we didn't have a lot of, cultures and things. I grew up in a Hispanic family, but we were pretty racist within our own freaking family. I will be honest with you. My dad has said stuff that I think of now, and I'm like, damn, Dad, like, and Mom would joke about it because my mom's Hispanic, and, we joke about it and stuff. And now I'm just kind of like, I'm offended for you, Mother, right? So there's just things that I think it's important that we are very aware of for the health and wellness of all people. And then to show, as a human, I see that you are human too. And these are the human things that I've seen and I've been told, and I want to respect that. That's what we strive for, okay? All right, so we have been talking about taking land from people, ways in which we use these things to, these systematic things to take land. Let's talk about what we do with the land. And one of those is environmental terrorism. We are literally going through environmental terrorism right now as we speak. We're trying to do better, but it consists of one or more unlawful actions that harm or destroy environmental resources or deprive others of their use. So when you ruin land, when it's toxic, when it is no longer something where you can cultivate or live on, that's environmental terrorism. That is literally destroying the land in a way in which you cannot come back from. And we're getting there. I mean, if we haven't already surpassed that, we're getting there, y'all. So the phrase is also used to label actions seen as the unnecessary or unjustified destruction of the environment for personal or corporate gain. Okay, I've worked for retail. I get it. I understand. But holy hell, there's a point where corporations, when I kind of want to put a link, and I might do this, about billionaires and what does it mean to be a billionaire, and there's a certain amount of money that is so astronomical for any human being to have, even if it's considered a corporation, that's still a certain amount of money that is astronomical that could be used for bigger, better things. You can argue with me on that, and to each their own. But when you come to a certain level of money, beyond that, you'd have to live, 15 lives just to spend it all. So anyway, I guess for me, when it comes to the environment, there's ways in which we can approach it and work on it that doesn't have to be fully about making the money. So anyway, I know, opinion, sorry. We're going to move past it. But these are just things you start to see when you really consider the power of, of land and what it can do for us and what it can also do against us. I think that's when you start to go, damn, man, like, human beings cannot live outside of nature. We cannot live outside of nature. And repeat that to yourself 1,000 times. When we start destroying nature, in a sense, we're just destroying ourselves. And some people will argue me that and say, well, nature will always, fix itself. But will it? Like, at some point, you have a plant in your house, and it'll grow as well as it can grow until it's not getting what it needs, and then it dies, right? So I think Earth, in a sense, is very similar, that if at some point, it can only go so far before it implodes on itself. So anyway, so after that, after environmental terrorism, we're going to go into settler colonialism. Sorry, I need some water. Give me a second. LaCroix. This stuff's so good. Okay. I don't really have any addictions, but I have an addiction to that stuff. So, okay. So, settler colonialism is a form of colonialism that seeks to replace the original population, whatever was there first, of the colonized territory with a new society of settlers, right? So this is obviously what happened when we took the indigenous people from their land and then we took over. It's an ongoing system of power that perpetrates the genocide and repression of indigenous peoples and cultures. So the very first settlers are constantly being moved from their land so that someone else can take over. Hawaii is hands down still the modern day version of that. There's not a lot of like murders going on in order to take the land that I know of. I'm not like there, but sometimes we just don't know what happens behind the doors, right? Anyway, so the idea here is what they're doing is with tourism taking over and the money part, people are buying out the land from the families. And in Hawaii, everyone's living in, pretty much the whole family owns the house. Like, so the young ones, they move off, they go to college. You got mom and dad there. Mom and dad are getting old. And then someone says, hey, I'll buy your land because it's incredibly, it's really expensive and we'll help you out a little bit. And then they go to a condo. Long story short, before you know it, all the land is being bought up from people who are not native to the land. That is settler colonialism. That's still happening to this day. It's just kind of how it is with nature or human beings. This is constantly a thing that's always happening. So the only problem is that because of that, it does perpetuate genocide and repression for these people. So we're having a lot of this actually happen with the Amazon. The land is being taken in order for, whatever purposes they're using, which is usually corporations, farming, McDonald's and stuff like that. So if you have more questions, go ahead and look into the Amazon stuff. But it's incredibly scary and it's not good for us at all. And it's not good at all right now. So anyway,